Sir, please check under your car. 7 years old, trembling in a golden sweater, standing between a billionaire and certain death. The words that would shatter a city's trust in justice itself. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is over there. I need to know who's brave enough to stick around for what happens next. The child's voice cut through the warm Westbridge Hills afternoon like a shard of ice through honey. Please, sir, check under your car. Michael Adams, just 7 years old, his small frame rigid with terror against the bakery's brick facade, faced the man the entire neighborhood whispered about in two directions. Joshua Graham, billionaire, ghost benefactor, the unseen hand that kept half of Westbridge from crumbling. But also, ruthless, untouchable, a man who bent the city to his will with quiet money and quieter power. But Michael had seen something 40 minutes earlier in the alley behind his mother's bakery. Something that made his hands shake so violently he'd dropped his sketchbook twice trying to pick it up. Something that made his heart feel like it was trying to climb out of his throat. Two police detectives, Detective Maxwell Watt, the department's golden boy with a jawline made for press conferences, and his silent partner, crouched beside a gleaming white SUV. Their movements were surgical, efficient, practiced. Planting something beneath the chassis wrapped in layers of plastic that caught the late afternoon light. A setup, a frame, a lie dressed in badges and sworn oaths. Now that man, Joshua Graham, was walking toward his vehicle with his nephew Ryan, their conversation light, unaware. And at the mouth of the street, an unmarked police sedan had just turned the corner, its engine purring low and predatory. Michael had seconds to decide. Stay silent and invisible, the way 7-year-olds were supposed to be, or speak a truth that could destroy his family. His next words would either expose a conspiracy or paint a target on everyone he loved. The light inside Sarah Adams' bakery thinned at the edges, gold dust from the day catching in the glass as if the whole shop were held in amber. Steam curled from a tray of cinnamon buns. A bell above the door jingled now and then when a customer slipped in for a loaf. Michael loved the hush of the place at closing time, the way the clock on the wall seemed to slow so he could memorize the shape of flour on his mother's knuckles. He should have been thinking about his sketchbook, about the blue crayon he'd lost earlier. Instead, he was thinking about how to make his mother laugh the way she did when the dough cooperated. He stepped out the back door for a second, just a second, and froze because the alley smelled wrong. Not sugar and yeast, but the metallic tang of oil, the low undernote of something that did not belong in a bakery's orbit. Two men leaned against the white SUV that always parked there. Michael had seen that car 100 times. Polished, heavy, like a shadow with chrome. He knew the silhouette of Joshua Graham's vehicle the way other kids knew the local ice cream truck by sound. Today, the men were not laughing. They moved in short, precise motions, hands disappearing under the chassis and reappearing with something wrapped in plastic. Michael pressed his back to the brick. He tasted copper in his mouth. He had heard grown-ups talk about Detective Watt on the news, how the man's jaw filled headlines and his awards filled plaques. He had not expected to find him in an alley like this, hands busy with something secret. Once this hits the news, Detective Watt's voice drifted over, low and satisfied. Graham's empire crumbles. No more untouchable billionaires in my city. His partner grunted agreement, securing the last zip tie. Drugs, detonators, falsified financial records, the full package. He won't see daylight for 20 years. Assuming he survives the arrest, Watt added, and the smile in his voice made Michael's stomach turn to ice. When the detectives left, stepping back into the sunlight as if they had simply been tying their shoes, Michael felt the world split along a seam. His small hands clutched the doorframe. His mind screamed at him to run inside, to find his mother, to hide in the flour-dusted safety of the kitchen. But Joshua Graham was going to walk to that car. Joshua Graham, who had anonymously paid their bakery's rent for 6 months last winter when the furnace died and the insurance lapsed. Joshua Graham, whose nephew Ryan sometimes stopped by for cookies and always tipped Michael $5 for helping carry boxes. Joshua Graham, who wasn't perfect. Michael had heard the whispers about hostile takeovers and crushed competitors, but who had never been anything but kind to the people of Westbridge Hills who needed kindness most. If you were 7 years old and saw what Michael just saw, would you stay silent or speak up? Most of you scrolling right now wouldn't even have the guts. Prove me wrong. Hit that subscribe button if you think you'd be brave enough. Michael ran, fast enough to make his knees burn, and cut across the curb just as a tall man in an immaculate navy suit walked toward the SUV with his nephew at his side. Ryan was mid-sentence, something about a basketball game, when Michael planted himself directly in front of the driver's side door. The man reached for the handle. Michael's breath tore out of him like a bird escaping a cage. He could have slipped away, made himself small and safe. Instead, his feet planted, his voice came out on a thin wire. "Sir, please check under your car." Joshua Graham halted mid-reach. The afternoon folded in on itself, sound dampening, the world narrowing to the space between a child and a billionaire. Graham's eyes, sharp, gray, the kind that had negotiated billion-dollar deals and stared down corporate raiders, dropped to Michael's face. Not with irritation, with immediate, intense focus. "What's your name, son?" Michael. Michael Adams. My mom. She owns the bakery." His hand shook as he pointed behind him. Recognition flickered across Ryan's face. "Sarah's boy?" But Joshua's gaze never left Michael. He crouched slowly, bringing himself to eye level, his expensive suit creasing without concern. "Why do you want me to check under my car, Michael?" The words tumbled out in a rush. "I saw them. 2 detectives. They were under your car. They put something there, packages wrapped in plastic. They said you were going to be gone for 20 years. They said..." His voice cracked. "They said you might not survive the arrest." The color drained from Ryan's face. But Joshua remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable, except for a single muscle tightening in his jaw. "Did they see you?" Michael shook his head violently. "I hid behind the dumpster. They didn't know I was there." "What did these detectives look like?" "One was..." He had the face from TV. Detective Watt. The one who arrested that banker last month. And his partner. Shorter. He didn't talk much. Joshua straightened slowly, his hand moving to his phone. But before he could dial, Sarah Adams burst through the bakery's back door, her apron still dusted with flour, her face tight with alarm. "Michael, get inside right now!" She froze when she saw who her son was talking to. "Mr. Graham? I'm so sorry if he's bothering." "Your son," Joshua interrupted quietly, "just saved my life." Sarah's expression cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then, as she followed Joshua's gaze to the undercarriage of his SUV, dawning horror. A crowd was beginning to form. Mrs. Patterson from the alterations shop, Mr. Williams from the hardware store. A jogger stopped mid-run, earbuds dangling. Phones emerged from pockets, camera lenses focusing. Joshua raised his voice, calm but carrying. "Everyone stay back, please. Don't touch anything." Then, to his nephew, "Ryan, call Edwards. Tell him to bring a flashlight and a camera. Tell him we need witnesses for what we're about to find." "What's happening?" Mrs. Patterson called out. "Is everything okay?" "That," Joshua said, kneeling beside his SUV with the careful movements of a man who suspected his vehicle might be rigged to explode, "is what we're about to discover." He pulled his phone's flashlight on, lay flat on his back on the pristine street, slid underneath. The silence stretched like taffy. Then, "Ryan, call 911. Ask for FBI, not local police. Tell them we have evidence of police corruption and a potential explosive device. And tell them we need a bomb squad." This is why most people don't speak up, because the moment you do, everything explodes. But if you're still watching, you're not like most people. Drop a like if you think this kid just made the biggest mistake of his life, or the bravest choice. The gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones raised higher. Someone started a live stream. Michael felt his mother's arms wrap around him from behind, pulling him back toward the bakery. But he couldn't look away from the man under the car, from the way Joshua's hand emerged holding his phone at arm's length, camera recording. "Ryan," Joshua's voice came from beneath the chassis, unnaturally steady. "Are you recording this?" "Every second." "Good. Because what I'm looking at is 3 evidence bags, official Charleston PD evidence bags with visible case numbers, containing what appears to be narcotics, falsified financial documents with my name and signature, and" a pause, "and an active detonator with a blinking LED timer." The world stopped breathing. And that's when the unmarked police sedan turned onto Westbridge Avenue, Detective Maxwell Watt behind the wheel, his expression confident and righteous. He was about to make the arrest of his career. He had no idea the entire city was already watching. Watt's vehicle approaches, unaware that his frame has been discovered. The community has surrounded Joshua. Evidence is being recorded. The trap has become a cage, and the wrong person is about to walk into it. Detective Maxwell Watt stepped out of his sedan with the confidence of a man who believed he was about to make history. His badge caught the afternoon light. His hand rested on his holster, not threatening, just visible, the kind of posture that said authority without saying a word. He had no idea he was walking into his own execution. The crowd parted slightly as he approached, but not the way crowds usually did for Detective Watt. Not with respect, with something else. Something that looked like anticipation mixed with dread. "Joshua Graham," Watt announced, his voice carrying across the street with practiced authority. "I need you to step away from the vehicle. We have credible intelligence regarding illegal activity, and I'm executing a warrant to search—" "Actually," Joshua's voice came from beneath the SUV, calm and cold as winter steel, "I think we're all going to stay right here. And I think you're going to want to see this." Edwards arrived at that moment, slightly out of breath, carrying a professional camera and a high-powered flashlight. Joshua's brother moved with purpose, kneeling beside the vehicle without a word, aiming the light where Joshua directed. The LED ring illuminated the undercarriage like a surgical theater. What the camera captured made the crowd collectively inhale. 3 official Charleston Police Department evidence bags, sealed, tagged, case numbers clearly visible through the clear plastic wrapping. Inside one, white powder in vacuum-sealed packets. Inside another, manila folders with documents, Joshua's name visible on the headers even from a distance. Inside the third, a small electronic device with a blinking red LED timer counting down. 12 minutes. 43 seconds. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "Is that—" "It's a bomb. Those are police evidence bags." "Why are police evidence bags under his car?" "You know what's crazy? Half of you watching this would have walked past that car and never said a word. But this 7-year-old didn't. If that doesn't make you respect courage, I don't know what will. Subscribe if you're actually invested in seeing how this ends." Phones lifted everywhere. Camera flashes popped. Someone's live stream notification chimed. Live. Billionaire's car booby-trapped by police? And within seconds, the viewer count started climbing. Detective Watt's face shifted. The confidence cracked like cheap porcelain. For just a fraction of a second, panic flashed across his features before his training kicked in, and he forced his expression back to neutral. "Everyone needs to back away," Watt said, his voice tighter now. "This is an active crime scene." "You're absolutely right," Joshua said, sliding out from under the SUV with careful, deliberate movements. He stood slowly, brushing dust from his suit. His gray eyes locked on Watt with the intensity of a predator that had just realized the hunter was actually prey. "This is a crime scene. The question is, Whose crime are we documenting? Watt's partner had gone pale. The younger officer beside him, barely old enough to grow a full beard, was staring at the evidence bags with something that looked like recognition dawning into horror. "Sir," the young officer whispered, tugging at Watt's sleeve. "Sir, those case numbers." "Shut up," Watt hissed, barely audible. But Michael heard it, and so did the woman standing closest with her phone recording everything. Edwards was narrating into the camera now, his voice steady and professional. 3 evidence bags, Charleston PD identification visible. Contents appear to be narcotics, falsified documents, and an electronic device with an active countdown timer currently at 12 minutes, 16 seconds. "Those could be planted by anyone," Watt said, but his voice had lost its command. "This is clearly a frame job to make the department look like what, detective?" Mrs. Davis's voice cut through the murmurs like a knife. She pushed forward from the crowd, elderly, barely 5 feet tall, leaning on a wooden cane, but her eyes blazed with fury. "Like they plant evidence? Like they frame innocent people? Because I've been saying that for 3 years since you arrested Thomas Miller." The crowd shifted. Murmurs became voices. "Thomas Miller was innocent. My cousin was arrested by Watt. Those evidence bags have case numbers," Mr. Williams called out, his hardware store apron still on. "Those aren't just random bags. Those are official bags from the property room. Someone with access put those there." Watt's jaw clenched. His hand moved toward his weapon, not drawing it, just touching it. A warning gesture. "You all need to disperse," he said, his voice dropping to something darker. "This is official police business. Anyone interfering with an investigation can be charged with obstruction. I suggest you think very carefully about your next moves, especially those of you with businesses in this neighborhood. Permits can be reviewed. Inspections can be ordered. I'd hate to see anyone's livelihood disrupted because they made poor choices today." The threat hung in the air like gasoline fumes. For a moment, no one moved. Then Mrs. Davis pulled out her phone. Her wrinkled fingers trembled slightly as she dialed, but her voice was steady as granite. "Yes, I need to report police corruption and request FBI assistance. My name is Margaret Davis. I'm at 447 Westbridge Avenue. And I'm witnessing what appears to be attempted murder by law enforcement." She paused, her eyes never leaving Watt's face. "Yes, I'll stay on the line. And yes, there are approximately 40 witnesses recording everything." This is the moment everything changes, and I guarantee half of you didn't think a story like this could get this intense. If you're hooked, don't just watch. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens when the FBI shows up. Detective Watt's face went from red to white to something close to gray. His young officer stepped backward, hands raised. "I didn't know," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I swear to God, I didn't know what we were doing until just now." "Shut your mouth," Watt snarled. But it was too late. The timer under Joshua's SUV blinked down to 11 minutes, 30 seconds. The FBI was 8 minutes away, and Detective Maxwell Watt had just realized that the entire city of Charleston was watching his career and his freedom detonate in real time. Michael stood frozen in his mother's arms, his golden sweater damp with sweat, his small body trembling with the weight of what he'd set in motion. He'd thought he was just warning one man. He'd had no idea he was about to expose an entire system. The bomb timer ticks down. The FBI races toward Westbridge Avenue. Watt's young officer begins to crack. And somewhere in the crowd, someone recognizes one of the case numbers on those evidence bags and realizes this conspiracy is far bigger than anyone imagined. The news vans arrived within 20 minutes. Channel 7, Channel 4, 2 national networks. Satellite dishes unfolded like mechanical flowers. Cameras swiveled toward the white SUV still cordoned off by FBI tape, and reporters smoothed their hair and checked their lipstick before going live. This is Westbridge Hills, where billionaire real estate mogul Joshua Graham narrowly escaped what federal investigators are calling an assassination attempt, disguised as a police arrest. But the question everyone's asking tonight is, who is Joshua Graham really? The answer depended on who you asked. Search his name online and you'd find articles about hostile corporate takeovers, competitors driven out of business, neighborhoods gentrified into unrecognizable luxury districts. You'd find the word ruthless attached to his name like a shadow. You'd see photos of him in boardrooms, stone-faced, signing deals that made fortunes and broke families. But ask Mrs. Davis, and she'd tell you about the anonymous donation that saved the community center when the city tried to shut it down. Ask Mr. Williams, and he'd show you the envelope that appeared under his hardware store door 3 winters ago. Enough money to cover 6 months of rent when his wife was in the hospital. No name, just a note. Westbridge takes care of its own. Ask Sarah Adams, and she'd tell you about the morning she found a check in her bakery mailbox for exactly the amount she needed to replace the furnace and pay back rent. No signature. But she knew. Everyone always knew. Joshua Graham didn't want credit for his kindness. He just wanted Westbridge Hills to survive. Now cameras surrounded Sarah's bakery like wolves circling prey. Reporters shouted questions, microphones thrust toward Michael's face. How did you know to check the car? Were you scared? Did the detective threaten you? Michael pressed against his mother's leg, his golden sweater suddenly feeling too tight, too visible, too much. The attention felt like insects crawling across his skin. Every eye, every camera, every stranger wanting a piece of the story, wanting a piece of him. Please, Sarah said, her voice shaking. He's 7 years old. Just leave him alone. A hand appeared on Sarah's shoulder. Joshua Graham, still in his dust-streaked suit, his gray eyes calm but immovable. The family has no comment, he said quietly. And if I see any of your cameras pointed at this child again, I'll personally ensure your networks face harassment lawsuits. Are we clear? The cameras shifted away. Joshua crouched to Michael's eye level, his voice dropping to something gentle. You did the right thing today, but I know it doesn't feel good right now, does it? Michael shook his head, tears burning behind his eyes. It won't feel good for a while, Joshua continued. Being the one who tells the truth never does. But your mother's bakery. He glanced up at Sarah. Any repairs, any lost revenue from today's closure, send me the invoices. And I heard Westbridge Elementary's art program was cut this year. Consider it reinstated. Anonymous donation, of course. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Mr. Graham, you don't have to... I know, he said simply. But your son saved my life. The least I can do is make sure his world doesn't fall apart because of it. You see how Joshua just protected that kid? That's loyalty. But Detective Watt? He's about to show you what betrayal looks like. Keep watching if you want to see a dirty cop try to lie his way out of a corner. 3 blocks away, in the Charleston Police Department's media briefing room, Detective Maxwell Watt stood before a different set of cameras. His uniform was crisp. His expression was grave, wounded. I want to be very clear about what happened today, he said, his voice carrying the perfect blend of righteous anger and hurt confusion. My department was set up. Someone with access to our evidence room stole official materials and used them to frame both myself and Mr. Graham. This is a sophisticated operation designed to undermine public trust in law enforcement. A reporter raised her hand. Detective, witnesses say they saw you placing materials under Mr. Graham's vehicle. Witnesses saw 2 men in plain clothes, Watt corrected smoothly. In the chaos and fear of the moment, they assumed those men were police. I was 3 blocks away at the precinct when this occurred. My partner and I responded to the scene after receiving an anonymous tip about suspicious activity. We're as much victims of this conspiracy as Mr. Graham. It was a beautiful lie. Confident, specific, almost believable. Internal Affairs opened a file that afternoon, but it moved slowly. Detective Watt had 15 years of commendations, 3 Valor Medals, and personal relationships with half the department's leadership. The investigation would be thorough, yes, but it would also be careful, cautious. No one wanted to destroy a decorated officer's career over a misunderstanding. In a small apartment on the east side of Charleston, Thomas Miller sat on a threadbare couch, watching the news coverage with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. He knew that SUV. He knew those evidence bags. He knew exactly how Detective Watt operated. 3 years ago, Thomas had been a warehouse supervisor with a clean record, a fiancé, and a future. Then, Watt arrested him for possession with intent to distribute. The drugs were found in Thomas's work locker. Official evidence bags, logged and sealed, from a case Watt had closed months earlier. Thomas's public defender had been overworked and underfunded. The evidence was ironclad. The judge was a former cop. Thomas took a plea deal. 5 years, reduced to 3 with good behavior. His fiancée left. His mother's health deteriorated from stress. By the time Thomas was released 8 months ago, everything he'd built was gone. He worked part-time at a gas station now, lived in a studio apartment that smelled like mildew, paid child support for a son he'd never held, born 2 months after he went to prison. Now he watched a 7-year-old boy's courage expose what Thomas had screamed about for 3 years, while everyone called him a liar. His phone buzzed, a text from a number he didn't recognize. "If you testify, we can reopen your case. But you need to be willing to go public. Are you?" Thomas's hands shook harder. Going public meant facing Watt again. It meant dragging his family through more pain. It meant risking retaliation. But it also meant maybe, holding his son for the first time. He typed back, "Yes." At Charleston PD headquarters, a junior internal affairs investigator named Rachel Williams, Mr. Williams's daughter, newly assigned to the department, pulled up the case files connected to the evidence bag numbers recorded under Joshua Graham's SUV. Her computer screen loaded, then displayed an error message. Files not found. Archived records missing. She tried again. Same result. She checked the physical archives. The boxes that should have contained those case files were empty except for intake forms. No evidence logs, no chain of custody documentation, no photographs. Someone had scrubbed them. Someone with access and authority. Rachel's hands went cold as she realized what she was looking at. Not just one frame job, but a system. Years of cases. Dozens of files. All missing. She picked up her phone to call her supervisor, then hesitated. If the files were missing, someone had removed them. Someone inside the department. Someone who might be listening. Instead, she took photos of every empty archive box, every missing file number, every gap in the chain of evidence, and she sent them to the FBI field agent who'd responded to Mrs. Davis's call. The truth was bigger than anyone had imagined, and it was about to burn through Charleston like wildfire. Files don't just disappear on their own. Someone's been covering tracks for years. If you think this story can't get any deeper, you're wrong. Subscribe now because what's coming next will blow your mind. Crucial evidence has been systematically destroyed. Thomas Miller has agreed to testify. And a junior investigator has just discovered that Detective Watt's corruption isn't measured in individual cases. It's measured in years. The young officer sat in his apartment at 2:47 a.m., staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. He'd joined the Charleston Police Department 18 months ago, with a diploma still warm from the academy and a head full of ideals about justice and protection. His training officer had been Detective Maxwell Watt, decorated, respected, the kind of cop they put on recruitment posters. "You want to make detective someday?" Watt had asked during their first patrol together. "Yes, sir." "Then you need to understand something. This city has a cancer. Rich criminals who think they're untouchable. Our job isn't just to arrest them, it's to make sure they stay arrested. Sometimes that means being creative with how we build cases. You understand? The young officer had nodded. He'd wanted so badly to impress, to belong, to be part of something bigger than himself. Now he understood what creative meant. Now he couldn't sleep without seeing those evidence bags sliding under Joshua Graham's SUV. Watt's voice in his ear. "The city will be cleaner by morning. Trust me." His phone buzzed. A text from Watt's partner. "Keep your mouth shut. Remember who signs your performance reviews." Then another, from a number he didn't recognize. "You looked scared on camera." "You should be. People who talk have accidents." His hands trembled so violently, he dropped the phone. Across the city, Michael couldn't sleep either. The praise had come first. Letters slipped under the bakery door calling him brave, heroic, a guardian angel. Neighbors stopped Sarah on the street to thank her for raising such a courageous son. A local church wanted to give him a community service award. Then the other messages started. Written on the bakery's window in soap, easy to wash off but impossible to forget. "Snitches get hurt." A voicemail on Sarah's phone at 3 a.m., voice disguised, almost robotic. "Your boy should learn to mind his business. Accidents happen to children who talk too much." Sarah had called the police. They'd taken a report, filed it, done nothing. Because how do you report threats to the police when the police might be making them? Now Michael lay in his small bed above the bakery, staring at the ceiling, his blue crayon clutched in one hand like a talisman. He'd wanted to help. He'd wanted to do the right thing. He hadn't known the right thing could feel so much like falling. This is what happens when you expose corruption. They come for you. And they came for a 7-year-old kid. If that doesn't make you angry enough to see this through, I don't know what will. Hit subscribe if you're ready to watch justice get served. In a coffee shop 3 blocks from the courthouse, a freelance journalist named Daniel Hayes sat with his laptop surrounded by printed case files and energy drink cans. Daniel had been chasing the Joshua Graham story like everyone else. Billionaire nearly killed, corrupt cop exposed, the kind of story that made careers. But something nagged at him. Those evidence bag numbers were specific, traceable. So he'd started tracing them. What he found made his blood run cold. Case Murder CH 2019 4471. Evidence logged by Detective Maxwell Watt. Defendant Thomas Miller. Conviction: possession with intent to distribute. Case number CH 2020 8834. Evidence logged by Detective Maxwell Watt. Defendant Brandon Cooper. Conviction: armed robbery. Case number CH 2021 22156. Evidence logged by Detective Maxwell Watt. Defendant Stephen Hayes. Conviction: assault with a deadly weapon. 7 cases. 7 convictions. 7 defendants who'd sworn the evidence was planted. 7 public defenders who'd been overworked and underfunded. 7 judges who'd trusted a decorated detective's testimony. But the deeper Daniel dug, the stranger it got. The evidence logs had gaps. Timestamps that didn't align with arrest reports. Chain of custody signatures that appeared in multiple locations simultaneously. And when he cross-referenced the case files with property room access logs, which he'd obtained through a Freedom of Information request, a pattern emerged. Every piece of evidence in those 7 cases had been logged into the property room at times when only Detective Watt and his direct subordinates had access. Daniel's hands shook as he created a spreadsheet. 7 cases became 12. 12 became 19. The encrypted ledger he'd found buried in metadata from the department's own server suggested there might be 40 or more. 40 lives destroyed. 40 families broken. 40 people screaming that they'd been framed while the city called them liars. He was uploading his findings to a secure cloud server when his phone rang. Unknown number. "Stop digging. a voice said. Male, calm, terrifying in its casualness. You're a freelancer. You need police sources to work in this city. Keep pursuing this, and you'll never get another interview, another tip, another press credential. Walk away. The line went dead. Daniel stared at his laptop screen. At 19 names, 19 faces in booking photos, 19 people the system had swallowed. He hit publish on his blog and titled it, The Evidence That Disappeared, a Pattern of Police Corruption in Charleston. Within 3 hours, it had 40,000 views. Within 6 hours, Daniel's car window was smashed and his apartment door kicked in. Nothing stolen, just a message. They knew where he lived. Thomas Miller sat in his mother's kitchen, the one place that still felt safe, holding the case file his public defender had finally sent over after 3 years of requests. His mother, thin, gray-haired, her hands twisted with arthritis, read over his shoulder. The evidence came from Watt's unit, Thomas whispered. The narcotics were from another case he'd closed. They just recycled them, planted them in my locker, destroyed my life with drugs that weren't even from a real crime. His mother's hand found his shoulder. That little boy saved you, Thomas. He saved all of you. He's 7 years old, Ma, and now people are threatening him because of what I couldn't prove. Because I wasn't... His voice cracked. I wasn't brave enough. His phone rang. FBI Field Agent Catherine Morrison. Mr. Miller, we'd like you to testify. We're building a case against Detective Watt, but we need victims willing to go on record. Your case was one of the first. It could be the foundation we need. Thomas closed his eyes. Testifying meant facing Watt in court. It meant reliving every moment of those 3 years. It meant putting his family at risk. But it also meant maybe, holding his son for the first time without the shadow of a false conviction hanging over them. I'll do it, he said. At 4:17 a.m., the young officer finally broke. He pulled out his phone and called a number he'd found online, FBI tip line. His voice shook so badly he could barely form words. I have evidence, files, recordings, but I can't meet publicly. He'll know, He paused, listening to footsteps in the hallway outside his apartment. He'll make me disappear like he did the others. I need protection. I need... A knock at his door. 3 sharp raps. Officer Matthews? Watt's voice. Friendly. Concerned. I saw your light on, just checking if you're okay. We need to talk about your testimony for internal affairs. The young officer's hand froze on the phone. His eyes went to the deadbolt he'd forgotten to lock. I have to go, he whispered into the phone. Don't open that door, the FBI agent said. Stay on the line. But the young officer had already hung up, because Detective Maxwell Watt was turning the doorknob, and he was smiling. You know what's about to happen, don't you? That officer's about to face the worst decision of his life. If you're not subscribed yet, do it now, because you need to see how this plays out. The young officer is alone with Watt. A journalist has been threatened. Thomas Miller has agreed to testify. And somewhere in Charleston, 40 case files are about to become 40 reasons why Detective Watt will do anything to keep the truth buried. Joshua Graham's home office looked like a war room. Edward stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the street below for unfamiliar cars. Ryan sat at the conference table with his laptop open, monitoring social media and news feeds in real time. A woman in a tailored gray suit, Joshua's attorney, Patricia Wells, 30 years of courtroom warfare etched into her sharp features, reviewed documents with the focused intensity of a surgeon examining X-rays. The FBI has 43 cases they're reviewing, Patricia said without looking up. All connected to Watt's unit. All with evidence irregularities. Thomas Miller's case is the strongest foundation, but they need more witnesses willing to testify. How many have come forward? Joshua asked. 3. Out of 43. Patricia finally looked up. The others are terrified. and they have reason to be. Edwards turned from the window. So we protect them. We use our resources to— To what? Patricia interrupted. Hide them? Relocate them? These are people with families, jobs, lives. You can't just erase them from Charleston. No, Joshua said quietly. But we can make it clear that anyone who threatens them will face consequences. Financial, legal, and public. We make it more dangerous to silence them than to let them speak. Ryan looked up from his laptop. Uncle Joshua, you're talking about going to war with the police department. No. Joshua's gray eyes were cold as winter steel. I'm talking about going to war with corruption. There's a difference. Patricia set down her pen. This will cost you, politically, financially. You'll make enemies in law enforcement who will remember this for decades. Every permit, every inspection, every business deal, there will be retaliation. Then they'll retaliate, Joshua said simply. A 7-year-old boy risked his life to save mine. The least I can do is make sure his courage meant something. That 7-year-old boy was currently sitting in the principal's office at Westbridge Elementary, his golden sweater torn at the shoulder, a bruise forming on his cheek. Principal Anderson looked between Michael and the other boy, Brandon, 9 years old, bigger by a head, with the expression of someone who wanted very much to be anywhere else. Brandon says you started it, Principal Anderson said carefully. Michael said nothing. His hands were folded in his lap, knuckles white. Is that true, Michael? No, ma'am, Brandon smirked. He's a liar. Everyone knows he's a liar. His mom probably told him to make up that story about the detective so they could get famous. That's not— Michael's voice cracked. My dad says snitches get hurt, Brandon continued, his voice taking on a sing-song quality that made Michael's stomach turn. He says people who can't mind their business end up in— That's enough, Principal Anderson snapped. She turned to Michael, and her expression softened. Did Brandon hit you first? Michael nodded. Then you're not in trouble. Brandon, you're suspended for 3 days. Your parents will be called. After Brandon left, still smirking, knowing his suspension meant nothing, Principal Anderson crouched beside Michael's chair. Sweetheart, I need you to know something. What you did was brave. But brave doesn't always feel good, and sometimes brave people become targets. She hesitated. If you need to talk to someone, we have a counselor. I just want to go home, Michael whispered. See what courage costs? A 7-year-old kid getting jumped at school because he did the right thing. If you're still watching and you're not furious, you're not paying attention. Like this video, if you think Michael deserves better. When Sarah picked him up 20 minutes later, she took one look at his face and started crying in the parking lot. Not the quiet kind of crying, the kind that came from somewhere deep and broken. Maybe we should leave, she said, gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. My sister's in Atlanta. We could stay with her until this settles down. Mama, I can't lose you, Michael. I can't. You're all I have. Michael wanted to say something brave, something about doing the right thing, about standing up for truth. But he was 7 years old and his cheek hurt, and he was so tired of being scared. So instead, he just said, okay. Detective Maxwell Watt sat in a private booth at a steakhouse downtown, across from a man in an expensive suit whose name was never spoken aloud, but whose influence ran through Charleston like electricity through power lines. The man cut his steak with surgical precision. This situation has become complicated. I'm handling it, Watt said. Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, a 7-year-old child has accomplished what internal affairs couldn't in 15 years. He's made you visible, and visible is vulnerable. The kid's terrified. His mother's pulling him out of school. They're leaving the city. That's not enough. The man set down his knife. You have 43 cases that could unravel. 43 people who could testify. Your young officer is already talking to the FBI. The journalist published his findings. You're hemorrhaging control, Maxwell. Watt's jaw clenched. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you've become a liability, and liabilities get cut loose. The man took a sip of wine. Unless you can make this problem disappear. Completely. I can't exactly make a 7-year-old disappear. The entire city's watching him. Then don't make him disappear. Make the witnesses disappear. Make the evidence disappear. Make enough people scared enough that no one dares testify. The man stood, adjusting his cufflinks. And do it fast, because if this reaches the courthouse, I can't protect you. And neither can anyone else. He left Watt sitting alone with a check for a $200 steak he hadn't touched. When Michael and Sarah returned to their apartment above the bakery that evening, there was an envelope taped to the door. Inside, written in cut-out magazine letters like something from a crime movie, "Smart kids stay quiet. Dumb kids end up in hospitals. Which kind are you?" Sarah's hands shook so violently she dropped the note. Michael picked it up, staring at the letters, at the crude threat constructed from pieces of magazines and newspapers. Someone had spent time on this. Someone had thought about which words to use, which letters to cut out, how to make a 7-year-old boy understand that speaking the truth could cost him everything. "We're leaving," Sarah said, her voice hollow. "Tonight. I'll call my sister. We'll pack what we need and—" Her phone rang. FBI agent Catherine Morrison. "Mrs. Adams, I need to inform you of a development. Daniel Hayes, the journalist who published the investigation into Detective Watt. He was struck by a vehicle approximately 30 minutes ago. The driver fled the scene." Sarah's face went white. "Is he—" "He's alive. Critical condition. But Mrs. Adams, this wasn't an accident. We have 3 witnesses who say the vehicle accelerated toward him intentionally." A pause. "I'm assigning protective custody to anyone connected to this case who's willing to testify. That includes your family." "Protective custody means staying in Charleston," Sarah whispered. "Yes." "What if I want to leave? What if I want to take my son somewhere safe?" Agent Morrison's voice was gentle but firm. "Then Detective Watt wins. And 43 innocent people stay in prison. And the next time someone sees something wrong, they'll remember what happened to the family who spoke up, and they'll stay silent." Sarah looked at Michael, at his torn sweater, his bruised cheek, his small hands clutching a threatening note. "I need to think about it," she said, and hung up. Outside, a car sat 3 houses down, engine idling, watching the bakery windows. Inside, Michael Adams wondered if telling the truth was worth dying for. And somewhere in a hospital bed, Daniel Hayes wondered the same thing, if he lived long enough to wonder anything at all. This is the cost of speaking up. A kid threatened, a journalist in critical condition, and a mother deciding whether to run or fight. If you think this is intense now, wait until you see what happens next. Subscribe if you're invested, because this story doesn't stop. A journalist fighting for truth lies in critical condition. Protective custody has been offered, but means staying in danger, and somewhere in Charleston, Detective Watt is being told to make witnesses disappear, by any means necessary. FBI field agent Catherine Morrison had been with the Bureau for 19 years. She'd worked organized crime, white-collar fraud, public corruption. She thought she'd seen every variation of dirty cop. She'd never seen anything like Maxwell Watt. The evidence room at the Charleston field office looked like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. 43 case files spread across 3 tables, photographs of evidence bags, chain of custody documents with signatures that appeared in 3 places simultaneously, timestamps that defied physics. And at the center of it all, a single thumb drive. Mrs. Davis had delivered it herself, walking into the FBI office at 6 a.m. with her wooden cane and an expression that could cut glass. "The young officer gave this to me," she'd said. "He's terrified, but he's also tired of being part of something evil." The thumb drive contained 6 months of text messages between Detective Watt and his subordinates. Instructions disguised as casual conversation. Code words that became obvious once you knew what you were looking for. Clean up the Graham situation tonight. Use the usual method. Evidence from the Cooper case can be recycled. No one checks the archives. The kid saw too much. Handle it quietly. Agent Morrison had been reading for 3 hours when her phone rang. Mrs. Davis, her voice shaking. "You need to come to Westbridge Avenue. Now. They're trying to hurt someone." The community response started with a phone tree. Mrs. Davis called Mr. Williams. Mr. Williams called the pastor at the AME church. The pastor called 30 parishioners. Within 40 minutes, 200 people stood outside Thomas Miller's mother's house. A human wall between a frightened family and whatever came next. Because someone had tried to break in at 3 a.m. Thomas's mother had heard glass breaking, called 911, then called Mrs. Davis, because she didn't trust the police anymore. By the time squad cars arrived, the neighborhood had surrounded the house. Phones recording, live streams running, a wall of witnesses that couldn't be intimidated or disappeared. The responding officers, not from Watt's unit, nervous and young, found a broken window and footprints in the flower bed. No suspect, no arrest. Just another attempted burglary that would be filed and forgotten. Except this time, 200 people weren't going to let it be forgotten. "This is witness intimidation," Mrs. Davis said, her voice carrying across the crowd. "This is what happens when people try to tell the truth in this city. But we're not backing down. Not anymore." The crowd erupted in agreement. Someone started chanting, others joined. By dawn, the video had 500,000 views, and the #WestbridgeStands was trending nationwide. Detective Watt watched it all from his car 3 blocks away, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He was losing control. You're watching a corrupt cop's empire crumble in real time. 200 people just said, "Not today." If that doesn't give you chills, nothing will. Drop a like if you're Team Westbridge. The young officer, Officer Matthews, though his first name was never recorded in official reports, sat in a coffee shop across from Agent Morrison at noon that same day. His hands trembled around a cup he hadn't touched. Dark circles hung under his eyes like bruises. "He came to my apartment," Matthews whispered. 4 nights ago. Said we needed to talk. Said loyalty was everything. Said officers who betrayed their brothers in blue ended up without jobs, without pensions, without protection." "Did he threaten you directly?" "He didn't have to. He showed me a file, not a police file, a personal one. Photos of my sister leaving her apartment, my parents' address, my girlfriend's work schedule." Matthew's voice cracked. "He said accidents happen to people who talk, to people they love." Agent Morrison leaned forward. "You gave Mrs. Davis the thumb drive. That took courage." "It took terror," Matthews corrected. "I'm terrified of what happens if he walks free. I'm terrified of what happens if I testify. I'm terrified every second of every day because I helped him destroy innocent lives and I can't—" He stopped, breathing hard. "I can't live with it anymore." "Then go public. Give a statement. Let people see that not everyone in that department is corrupt. Show them that some officers still believe in the oath they took." Matthews was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. 3 hours later, he stood outside Charleston PD headquarters with Agent Morrison beside him, reading from a prepared statement while news cameras broadcast it live. "My name is Officer David Matthews. I've been with Charleston PD for 18 months. And I was instructed by Detective Maxwell Watt to participate in evidence planting, witness intimidation, and conspiracy to commit fraud. I have provided the FBI with documented proof of these crimes, and I am prepared to testify." His voice shook, but it didn't break. "I'm ashamed of what I've done. But I'm more ashamed of what I would become if I stayed silent. To everyone Detective Watt has hurt, I'm sorry, and I'm going to help make this right." The crowd of reporters erupted with questions. Matthews didn't answer them. He simply walked into the FBI field office and didn't come out. Detective Watt watched the broadcast from his living room. Then he made 3 phone calls. By evening, things were in motion. Officer Matthews left the FBI field office at 11 p.m. under protective escort. 2 agents walked him to a safe house 3 miles away, a nondescript apartment building with secure entry and surveillance cameras. He should have been safe. At 11:47 p.m., a 911 call reported an officer down in the stairwell of that building. Officer Matthews lay crumpled at the bottom of the concrete stairs, his head bleeding, his phone shattered beside him. The first responders found no witnesses, no security footage. The cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned 30 minutes earlier. No signs of forced entry or struggle. Just a young officer who'd apparently tripped and fallen down a full flight of stairs hard enough to fracture his skull. Agent Morrison arrived at the hospital at 12:20 a.m. Matthews was in surgery, critical but stable. The doctors said if he'd hit his head 2 inches to the left, he'd be dead. She stood in the hallway, staring at the closed surgical doors, and made a decision. This ended now. She called her supervisor at FBI headquarters in Washington. I need authorization for a full-scale investigation into Charleston PD. I need warrants for Detective Maxwell Watt's home, vehicle, and financial records. And I need it tonight. On what grounds? Attempted murder of a federal witness, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. And we have 43 cases worth of evidence. Sir, this isn't just one dirty cop. This is systematic corruption. And it's going to keep killing people until we stop it. There was a pause. Then, you have authorization. Bring me everything. By 3 a.m., federal agents were executing warrants across Charleston. Watt's home, his car, his locker at the precinct, his partner's residence, the evidence room at Charleston PD. What they found would take months to fully catalog. Encrypted files on personal laptops, burner phones with deleted messages that forensic teams would recover, financial records showing payments from shell corporations, and in Watt's garage, sealed in plastic bins, evidence bags from cases that had been officially closed and destroyed. Evidence he'd kept as insurance or trophies. By dawn, Detective Maxwell Watt was in federal custody. But the city of Charleston was just waking up to realize how deep the rot actually went. And in a hospital room, Officer Matthews opened his eyes, surrounded by FBI protection, and whispered to Agent Morrison, "Did we get him?" "We got him," she said. Matthews closed his eyes again. For the first time in 18 months, he slept without nightmares. Watt's in custody. Matthews is alive. But if you think this is over, you haven't been paying attention. The next chapter is going to show you just how deep this corruption goes. Subscribe now if you want to see the whole system burn. Watt is in custody, but the investigation is just beginning. The question now isn't whether he's guilty, it's how many others were involved, and whether the system that enabled him for 15 years is ready to face what it's become. The vigil started at sunrise. Someone had posted on social media, "If you believe in justice, meet at Westbridge Avenue at 6 a.m. Bring candles, bring courage, bring witnesses." By 6:15, 300 people lined the street outside Sarah's bakery. By 7 o'clock, it was 500. By the time the news helicopters arrived, Westbridge Avenue looked like a peaceful occupation. Families, business owners, church groups, and people who'd driven from across Charleston just to stand together. Mrs. Davis stood at the center, her wooden cane planted like a flag. "They tried to silence us with fear," she called out, her voice carrying over the crowd. "They tried to make us believe that speaking truth was more dangerous than living with lies. But we're still here, and we're not moving." The crowd roared agreement. Joshua Graham stood on the bakery's steps beside Sarah and Michael, watching the community that had once whispered about him now form a protective wall around his family and theirs. Edwards and Ryan flanked them, alert and watchful. "You didn't have to do this," Sarah whispered to Joshua. "Yes," he said simply. "I did. Your son saved my life. Now it's my turn." At 8:30 a.m., 3 internal affairs vehicles pulled up. 4 officers emerged, not Watts people, but bureaucrats sent to seize evidence, documents, anything that could be controlled or contained before the FBI took complete jurisdiction. They stopped at the edge of the crowd. "We need access to the original crime scene," the lead investigator announced. "This is official police business. You need to disperse." "No," Mrs. Davis said. "Ma'am, you're obstructing. We're protecting," she interrupted. "There's a difference. The FBI has jurisdiction now. Until they tell us to move, we're staying right here." The internal affairs officers looked at each other, at the cameras, at 500 people who weren't angry, weren't violent, but absolutely weren't moving. They retreated to their vehicles to make calls. The crowd held its ground. At 10:15 a.m., Thomas Miller walked out of Charleston County Detention Center into blinding sunlight. A federal judge had signed the emergency order at 9 a.m. Thomas's conviction was overturned pending investigation. The evidence that had put him in prison for 3 years was confirmed to have been planted. He stood on the steps, blinking, unable to process freedom after so long in a cell. Then he saw them. His mother, older, thinner, her face etched with years of grief, running toward him with the speed of someone half her age. Behind her, a young woman carrying an infant in a blue blanket. Thomas's legs nearly gave out. "Mama!" She crashed into him, sobbing, holding him like she'd never let go. "My baby, my boy, they gave you back to me." Thomas couldn't speak, could barely breathe. His arms wrapped around his mother. And for the first time in 3 years, he felt like a human being instead of a number. The young woman approached slowly. She looked terrified and hopeful in equal measure. "Thomas," she said softly, "this is your son. His name is David. He's 9 months old." Thomas stared at the baby, at dark eyes that looked so much like his own, at tiny hands that reached toward him like they somehow knew. "Can I—" His voice broke. "Can I hold him?" She placed the baby in his arms. David looked up at his father for the first time. Didn't cry. Just watched with that solemn infant intensity that sees straight through to the soul. Thomas's tears fell onto his son's blanket. "Hey, buddy," he whispered. "I'm your dad. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I'm so sorry." The cameras captured everything. The reunion broadcasted live across Charleston. A man who'd lost 3 years to a lie, finally holding the son he'd never met. Proof that justice, real justice, could still matter. If that reunion didn't hit you right in the chest, you're not human. This is why Michael's courage mattered. This is why people stood up. If you're not subscribed yet, what are you even doing? Hit that button now. In his holding cell at the Federal Detention Center, Detective Maxwell Watt watched the broadcast on a small television. His partner had flipped. 3 subordinate officers had given statements. Officer Matthews had woken up and was talking. The evidence seized from Watt's home was damning. His career was over. His freedom was over. But Maxwell Watt hadn't spent 15 years building a corrupt empire without learning how power really worked. If he was going down, he wasn't going down alone. He requested his one phone call, made it to his attorney, spoke for exactly 90 seconds. Then he returned to his cell and smiled. By noon, a recording leaked to every major news outlet in Charleston. Watt's voice, calm and measured. "People want to know how one detective operated with impunity for 15 years. Let me tell you, I didn't operate alone. I had protection. I had orders. And if they want the full story, they should ask Deputy Chief Thomas Morrison why he personally signed off on evidence transfers from my unit 47 times. They should ask why he blocked 3 separate internal affairs investigations into my conduct. They should ask who really benefits when the untouchables in this city get taken down. The recording ended. The silence that followed was deafening. Deputy Chief Thomas Morrison, decorated officer, 30-year veteran, 2 terms on the city council, brother of FBI agent Catherine Morrison, was implicated. The stakes had just exploded. Agent Morrison stood in the FBI field office conference room, staring at her phone as the recording played for the 3rd time. Her brother's name, her brother's career, her brother's signature on documents she'd have to investigate. Her supervisor appeared in the doorway. "Catherine, I'm recusing myself," she said immediately, "from anything involving my brother. Someone else needs to handle that part of the investigation." "We'll assign it." "But Catherine..." He hesitated. "Is there any possibility Watt's telling the truth?" She wanted to say no, wanted to defend her brother without hesitation. But she'd been an FBI agent for 19 years. She knew better than to let family blind her to evidence. "I don't know," she admitted. "But if he's involved, I want him investigated as thoroughly as anyone else. No exceptions, no protection." Her supervisor nodded. "Then we investigate everyone, from the top down. If this corruption goes higher than Watt, we burn it all down." On Westbridge Avenue, the vigil continued. Officer Matthews was released from the hospital at 2 p.m. and brought directly to the FBI office under armed escort. His testimony would take 4 hours. Every detail, every instruction, every moment he'd helped destroy innocent lives. At 6 p.m., he emerged and walked to Westbridge Avenue. The crowd parted for him, some with anger, some with cautious respect. He'd been part of the machine that hurt them, but he'd also helped expose it. He found Michael standing with his mother, still in that golden sweater, still looking small and scared and impossibly brave. Matthews knelt to the boy's level. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I'm sorry I was part of something that tried to hurt you. You're braver than I ever was." Michael looked at him with those serious 7-year-old eyes. "Are you going to help fix it?" "Yes," Matthews said. "I promise." Michael nodded, then held out his hand. Matthews shook it, the smallest handshake that ever sealed the biggest promise. As night fell over Westbridge Hills, 500 people lit candles. The street glowed with tiny flames, each one a refusal to let darkness win. But in Federal Holding, Maxwell Watt's recording played on loop across news channels. The battle wasn't over. It was just getting started. Watt just threw everyone under the bus. The deputy chief. The whole system. If you think this can't get any bigger, you're wrong. Subscribe and turn on notifications because what happened next is going to explode everything you thought you knew about this case. Watt has implicated Deputy Chief Morrison, throwing the investigation into chaos. Is the corruption even deeper than anyone imagined? And can justice survive when the system itself might be rotten at its core? The federal courthouse in downtown Charleston looked like a fortress on the morning of October 12th. Barricades lined the steps. News vans occupied every parking space within 3 blocks. Security checkpoints backed up for half an hour. Inside, courtroom 4A was packed to capacity with a waiting list of 200 people who'd never get inside. United States of America vs. Maxwell Watt. 43 counts of evidence tampering. 19 counts of conspiracy to commit fraud. 7 counts of witness intimidation. 2 counts of attempted murder. The prosecution had spent 3 months building an airtight case. The defense had spent 3 months trying to find cracks in it. They hadn't found any. Detective Maxwell Watt sat at the defense table in a gray suit that made him look smaller than he'd ever looked in uniform. His attorney, an expensive hired gun from Atlanta, whispered strategies that sounded increasingly desperate. Across the aisle, the prosecution team led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Hassan reviewed their witness list one final time. 43 victims, 12 officers who'd testified against Watt, forensic experts, financial investigators, and one 7-year-old boy in a golden sweater who would never testify, but whose presence in the gallery would remind everyone why they were here. Judge Michael Rodriguez entered at 9 o'clock a.m. sharp. All rise. The trial began. The first week was technical. Chain of custody documents, evidence room access logs, digital forensics showing deleted text messages recovered from Watt's devices. The prosecution built their case brick by brick, each piece of evidence another nail in the coffin. Watt's attorney tried to create doubt, suggested the evidence had been mishandled, implied that Watt was being scapegoated for systemic failures, argued that a decorated 15-year veteran deserved the benefit of the doubt. Then Officer Matthews took the stand. He'd lost 20 pounds since going public. His uniform was gone, replaced by a simple suit. His badge had been surrendered. His career was over, but his testimony was devastating. Detective Watt instructed me to retrieve evidence bags from closed cases, Matthews said, his voice steady despite the trembling hands. He called it recycling. He said we were cleaning up the city by making sure criminals, his words, stayed off the streets. He said judges were too lenient, that we needed to ensure convictions stuck. "And you participated in this?" Hassan asked. "Yes, ma'am. To my eternal shame, I participated. I planted evidence in 7 cases under his direct instruction." "Why did you come forward?" Matthews looked directly at Michael, sitting between Sarah and Mrs. Davis in the gallery. "Because a 7-year-old child had more courage than I did, and I couldn't live with that." Watt's attorney declined to cross-examine. A decorated detective just got destroyed by his own officer's testimony. If you're not seeing how this all connects back to one brave kid, you're missing the point. Like this video, if you believe courage matters more than rank. Thomas Miller testified on day 9. He walked to the stand slowly, like a man who still couldn't believe he was free. His son's baby bracelet was tied around his wrist, a reminder of everything he'd lost. 3 years, Thomas said when Hassan asked him about his conviction. "I lost 3 years. I missed my son's birth. I missed his first word, his first step, his first everything. My mother's health deteriorated from stress. My fiancée moved on with her life because she thought I was guilty. Everyone thought I was guilty because a decorated detective said I was." "What did you lose besides time, Mr. Miller?" "Everything," his voice cracked. "My job, my savings, my reputation. People in my neighborhood still cross the street when they see me because they think I'm a drug dealer. My son will grow up knowing his father was in prison, even though I did nothing wrong. You can't give me those years back. You can't undo that damage. All you can do is make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." The gallery was silent, except for quiet crying. Michael watched from his seat, his small hand clutching his mother's. He didn't fully understand the legal terminology, but he understood pain. He understood what it meant when grown men cried talking about their children. Watt's attorney stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Miller, isn't it true you had drug paraphernalia in your possession when—" "That was planted," Thomas interrupted. "We've proven it was planted. Those evidence bags came from Detective Watt's unit. The timestamps prove I couldn't have possessed those items. This isn't speculation anymore. It's documented fact." The attorney sat down. 18 more victims testified over the next week. Fathers who'd missed their children's childhoods, a teacher who'd lost her career, a veteran who'd lost his benefits, a college student who'd lost his scholarship. Every story was the same. Detective Watt had decided they were guilty, so he'd made sure they were convicted. On day 17, Watt took the stand in his own defense. It was a calculated risk. His attorney had advised against it, but Watt believed he could charm a jury the way he'd charmed the media for 15 years. He was wrong. Hassan's cross-examination was surgical. "Detective Watt, you testified that you never planted evidence. Is that correct?" "That's correct." "Then please explain these text messages recovered from your phone." She displayed them on the courtroom monitors. Use the Cooper drugs for the Graham case. Same packaging. No one will notice. That's from you to Officer Matthews, dated 3 days before Mr. Graham's attempted arrest. Watt's jaw tightened. That's taken out of context. What context makes instructing an officer to reuse evidence from one case in another case acceptable? I was speaking hypothetically. You were speaking specifically about recycling evidence. We have 47 similar messages. 47 times you instructed subordinates to plant evidence. Those messages could have been altered. They were verified by 3 independent forensic experts. They came directly from servers backed up by your department. They're authentic, Detective Watt, and they prove you systematically framed innocent people for 3 years. Watt's composure finally cracked. I was trying to protect the city. These people were innocent, Hassan interrupted. They had families. They had lives. They had constitutional rights that you violated because you decided you were judge, jury, and executioner. Watt said nothing. No further questions. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. Michael sat in the hallway outside the courtroom with his mother, Mrs. Davis, Thomas Miller, and dozens of others whose lives had intersected with Watt's corruption. When the bailiff called them back, the tension was suffocating. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. 43 counts. Guilty on all counts. The gallery erupted. People sobbed. Thomas Miller held his mother and son. Mrs. Davis closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. Michael just held his mother's hand and felt the weight finally lift. But as they filed out of the courtroom, a federal prosecutor stopped Joshua Graham in the hallway. Mr. Graham, we need to talk. During our investigation, we found a sealed vault in the precinct basement. It contained files dating back 12 years, cases we didn't know existed. There might be 60 more victims. Joshua's face went pale. 60 more? Maybe more. We're just beginning to go through them. The victory suddenly felt incomplete. Justice had been served. But the scars went deeper than anyone had imagined. Watt's going to prison, but 60 more victims just surfaced. This isn't over. If you want to see how deep this rabbit hole goes, subscribe now. Watt is convicted, but the discovery of additional hidden files suggests the corruption might span over a decade. How many more lives were destroyed? And can a system that allowed this for 12 years ever truly be trusted again? The sentencing hearing came 3 weeks after the verdict. Judge Rodriguez looked down at Detective Maxwell Watt from the bench. No longer a decorated officer, just prisoner number 847392 in an orange jumpsuit. And his voice carried the weight of every destroyed life. For 43 counts of evidence tampering, 19 counts of conspiracy, 7 counts of witness intimidation, and 2 counts of attempted murder, I sentence you to 35 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. The gavel fell. Watt's face remained stone. But his hands, cuffed in front of him, trembled as the bailiffs led him away. In the gallery, Thomas Miller held his infant son David close and whispered, "It's over. We're finally free." Mrs. Davis clutched her wooden cane and smiled for the first time in months. And Michael Adams, sitting between his mother Sarah and Joshua Graham, felt something he hadn't felt since that afternoon in the alley. Safety. 35 years. No parole. Justice served. But if you think this is where the story ends, you haven't been paying attention. Subscribe now, because what comes after the verdict is where the real story begins. The aftermath came quietly. Joshua Graham didn't hold press conferences or make grand announcements. He simply ensured that Sarah's bakery received what she needed, a new security system installed overnight, legal protections that meant no inspector or permit officer could harass her, and an anonymous donation that covered 6 months of operating costs. When Sarah tried to thank him, Joshua just shook his head. "Your son saved my life. This doesn't come close to repaying that." But he did give Michael something. One afternoon, Joshua knelt beside the 7-year-old outside the bakery, holding a small velvet box. "This is for you," he said quietly. Inside was a silver star charm on a simple chain, small enough for a child but solid, real, permanent. "Stars are for people who shine in the darkness," Joshua explained. "You did that, Michael. You saw something wrong, and you spoke up when no one else would. That took more courage than most adults will ever have." Michael turned the charm over in his small hands, watching it catch the light. "Will people stop being mad at me now?" he asked quietly. Joshua's expression softened. "Some already have. Others will take time. But the people who matter, the people whose lives you saved, they'll never forget what you did." Life in Westbridge Hills slowly returned to its rhythm. The news vans packed up. The reporters moved on to other stories. The vigil candles were swept away, leaving only faint wax stains on the pavement. Thomas Miller got a job at Mr. Williams's hardware store. Steady work, decent pay, a boss who believed in second chances. His son David took his first steps in the apartment they'd rented 3 blocks from his mother's house. Every morning, Thomas walked past the courthouse and remembered what freedom tasted like after 3 years of having it stolen. Officer David Matthews entered witness protection and left Charleston. But before he disappeared, he sent Michael a handwritten letter that Sarah read aloud. "You showed me what real courage looks like. I hope I can be half as brave as you someday. Thank you for saving me from becoming someone I couldn't live with. Officer Matthews." Michael folded the letter carefully and placed it in his sketchbook, next to drawings of that day in the alley. "You know what's crazy? Most people would have walked away by now." Justice served, story over, scroll to the next video. But you're still here. You know there's more to this. Hit that like button if you can feel what's coming next. Mrs. Davis organized a community fund to help the 60 newly discovered victims of Watt's corruption. People who'd been in prison for years, whose cases were now being reviewed, whose lives might finally be restored. The bakery's bell jingled. Customers returned. Flour dust settled on Sarah's apron again. The world kept turning, but not everyone had moved on. 3 months after sentencing, a plain manila envelope arrived at the FBI field office addressed to Agent Catherine Morrison. Inside, a single thumb drive and a handwritten note on Charleston PD letterhead. Watt wasn't the apex. He was just the most visible piece. If you want the full picture, follow the money in these files. But be careful. Some of the names will surprise you. Some will destroy you. A friend in the department. Agent Morrison inserted the thumb drive into her secure terminal. What loaded made her hands go cold. Financial transfers, Shell Corporation receipts. Payroll records showing Detective Watt receiving consulting fees from 7 different LLCs, all of which traced back to a single holding company registered in Delaware. A holding company owned by 3 Charleston City Council members, 2 circuit court judges, and Deputy Chief Thomas Morrison. Her brother. The evidence she'd spent 3 months trying not to find had just landed in her lap with a bow on it. Her own brother. The corruption goes all the way to the top. If you're not subscribed yet, you're about to miss the biggest revelation in this entire story. Click that button now, because the system's about to burn. Catherine sat in her office for 20 minutes, staring at the screen. Then she picked up her phone and called her supervisor. "Sir, I need to report potential corruption involving multiple city officials, including Deputy Chief Morrison. Your brother." "Yes, sir. My brother." The pause on the other end felt like an eternity. "Send me everything. And Catherine, I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry yet, sir. If he's guilty, I want him prosecuted like anyone else. If he's innocent, the evidence will show it. Either way, no exceptions." She hit send on the email. The files transferred to Washington. Then she called her brother for the last time as his sister, and the first time as an FBI agent building a case. "Tom, we need to talk, and you need a lawyer." 4 months after sentencing, Ryan Graham, Joshua's nephew, who'd been standing beside him that day on Westbridge Avenue, walked into Charleston City Hall with a briefcase full of evidence. He'd been quietly conducting his own investigation, following paper trails, connecting dots, building a case that showed exactly how Detective Watt's operation had functioned for 12 years. The answer was simple and devastating: real estate. Every person Watt framed had one thing in common. They lived in properties targeted for development, properties that, coincidentally, became available after the tenants were convicted and evicted. Properties that were then purchased by shell companies and flipped for massive profits. Brandon Cooper's family had owned a corner lot in the historic district, now a luxury condo building. Stephen Hayes had rented a warehouse space downtown, now a boutique hotel. Thomas Miller had lived in an apartment building that failed inspection and was demolished, now a tech startup campus. 43 victims, 43 properties. 43 pieces of a gentrification scheme disguised as law enforcement. And every single property transaction could be traced back to the same holding company Catherine Morrison had just discovered. Ryan handed his findings to a city council investigator and said simply, "Detective Watt didn't just destroy lives for fun. He destroyed them for profit, and these are the people who paid him to do it." This isn't just about one dirty cop anymore. This is about an entire system that turned police badges into weapons for real estate profits. If that doesn't make you furious, check your pulse. Subscribe and turn on all notifications. This investigation just went nuclear. 6 months after sentencing, the first dominoes fell. Deputy Chief Thomas Morrison was arrested at his home at 6 a.m. No press conference, no dramatic perp walk. Just federal agents, handcuffs, and silence. 2 city council members resigned before charges could be filed. 3 judges recused themselves from all cases pending investigation. And the holding company dissolved overnight, its assets frozen, its records subpoenaed. The Charleston Post ran a front-page headline: "The system was the crime. How police corruption masked a decade of real estate fraud." Daniel Hayes, the journalist who'd been struck by a vehicle and nearly killed, wrote the exposé from his hospital bed, one-handed, with a neck brace and determination that wouldn't quit. His final paragraph read, "A 7-year-old boy saw something wrong and spoke up. It took the rest of us 6 months to realize he'd exposed something bigger than any of us imagined. The question now is, will we have the courage to see it through?" The article was nominated for a Pulitzer. Daniel Hayes was nominated for sainthood by every reporter who'd ever been threatened into silence. One evening, 6 months after the trial, Michael sat at the small table in the bakery's back room with his sketchbook open. He'd drawn the memory in careful detail. The white SUV, the alley, the moment he'd stepped forward and said the words that changed everything. But he'd also drawn what came after. The vigil candles, Thomas Miller holding his son David, Mrs. Davis standing with her cane like a warrior's staff, Officer Matthews walking into the FBI office, and in the corner of the page he'd drawn himself, small, scared, but standing. His mother appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a towel. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" "The day I helped Mr. Graham," Michael said quietly. Then he pointed to the TV mounted in the corner, where the evening news was playing. The anchor's voice drifted over. Federal investigation into Charleston's police department has now expanded to include real estate fraud, judicial corruption, and what prosecutors are calling the most extensive criminal conspiracy in the city's history. Former Deputy Chief Morrison and 2 city council members will face trial beginning next month. Michael's hand tightened on his blue crayon. "Mama, are there more people like Detective Watt?" Sarah sat beside him, her expression honest and sad. "Yes, baby. I think there might be." Then someone needs to watch for them, right? Someone needs to speak up. She pulled him close, kissing the top of his head. Yes. But it doesn't always have to be you. You've done enough, Michael. You've done more than enough. But Michael looked at his drawing, at the small figure of himself standing between danger and truth, and he understood something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. One voice could change everything. One person seeing something wrong and refusing to stay silent could save lives, expose systems, burn down empires built on lies. But it only worked if people kept watching, kept listening, kept believing that truth mattered more than fear. You've seen a kid risk everything. You've watched justice happen in real time. But here's the thing. Stories like this happen every day, and most people just scroll past. If you made it this far, you're not most people. Subscribe. Because the world needs more people who pay attention when it matters. Outside, Westbridge Avenue settled into evening. Streetlights flickered on. Families walked home from dinner. The city breathed and moved and lived. Imperfect, complicated, but trying. Joshua Graham stood on his balcony 3 miles away, watching the lights of Westbridge Hills flicker like stars in the distance. His phone buzzed. A text from Ryan. The prosecutor says Morrison's case is solid. They're going after everyone. Joshua typed back. Good. Burn it all down if you have to. Then we rebuild it right. He thought about Michael Adams, 7 years old, golden sweater, voice like a shard of ice through honey, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the naive kind, the hard-earned kind. The kind that knew darkness existed, but chose to light candles anyway. In a small bakery above the street, Michael closed his sketchbook and carefully fastened the silver star charm around his neck. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew that if he ever saw something wrong again, something that could hurt someone, he wouldn't stay silent. Because a small voice had changed a city, and the city had learned to listen. Now, it just had to keep listening. Detective Maxwell Watt is currently serving 35 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. He has filed 3 appeals. All have been denied. Officer David Matthews entered witness protection and reportedly works in education, teaching ethics to new police recruits in the Pacific Northwest. Thomas Miller was fully exonerated and reunited with his family. He now advocates for criminal justice reform and has testified before the South Carolina State Legislature twice. His son David just turned 2 years old. Deputy Chief Thomas Morrison was convicted on 23 counts of conspiracy, racketeering, and corruption. He received 18 years in federal prison. His sister, FBI agent Catherine Morrison, led the investigation that convicted him. The investigation into Charleston PD's evidence room uncovered 67 additional falsified cases spanning 12 years. 61 convictions have been overturned. 6 remain under review. Michael Adams still lives in Westbridge Hills with his mother Sarah. He's 8 years old now. He still draws. And he still wears the silver star charm Joshua Graham gave him. Mrs. Davis continues to organize community advocacy efforts. She's 73 years old and doesn't plan to stop anytime soon. Daniel Hayes won the Pulitzer Prize for investigative journalism. He walks with a cane now, but says it was worth it. Joshua Graham quietly funded the legal defense for all 67 victims whose cases were discovered. He's never given an interview about it. Sometimes the smallest voices matter the most. Sometimes one person speaking up can bring down an empire. Sometimes courage looks like a 7-year-old boy in a golden sweater saying 5 words. Sir, please check under your car. This story started with one kid who refused to stay silent. It ended with an entire system exposed. If you made it to the end, you already know truth matters. Subscribe so you never miss stories that remind you why courage wins. Because the world needs more people like Michael Adams, and more people like you who actually pay attention.